Hello, welcome back to our bookshop in Tring. I'm Ben Morehouse. So we've got another author interview, and we're talking to TM Logan. TM Logan has written three books before this one, and but the fourth is called The Catch, and it's a psychological thriller stroke family drama. So I do hope you enjoy. He's talking to Kim Baiden.
Good.
Hey, Ben, thank you so much. Welcome to Tring and our bookshop. I'm speaking today to TM Logan about his new book, The Catch, which I have one up here, and he has one as well, or several, I think. So Tim, welcome. First of all, just so you know, lots of people know me from the bookshop, but actually psychological thrillers are not really my thing that I would normally read, and I took The Catch home, and I have to be honest, I read it in 3 sessions. I started and I couldn't put it down, and I was surprised that I just couldn't stop. And then after I'd devoured that, I went on to The Holiday, which was your previous book,
Yes.
with one of the Richard and Judy Book Club picks. Have I got that right?
Summer last year, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I love them both, and I've got 29 seconds and Liars to go. So
Fantastic, thank you.
I love it. So just if you don't mind, Tim, just tell us a little bit about The Catch. Give us a bit of an outline of what people are going to expect.
Yeah, so The Catch, as you mentioned, is a psychological thriller. It's kind of based around a family and a father, a mum and dad, and the father has got one child. They've got one child together who's in her mid-20s, and one day she brings home this new boyfriend, a new one. They've been going out together for quite some time already by the time the parents meet him, and he kind of comes across to everybody else as kind of a perfect, as a perfect partner. He's very polite, and he's successful at work, and he's kind of he's an army veteran, and he's handsome, and he's kind of all these things going for him, and so he's kind of supposed to be the sort of typical catch in the traditional sense of the word. But the main character in the story, the protagonist Ed, who's the father, he just instantly has this kind of gut feeling, kind of a sixth sense about this guy Ryan, that something is not quite right about him. Something underneath the surface is going on that he's kind of keeping hidden. And Ed is the only one who kind of has this feeling about Ryan, and so he sets about trying to find out what the truth is about him before kind of his daughter is drawn in before it's too late. So that's the kind of setup you get in the kind of first few chapters of the story, and then it kind of follows Ed's journey as he goes on this kind of mission to discover the truth behind his daughter's new partner.
I have to say that Ed made me really cross, and he made me really emotional, and I thought that was amazing how you did that, Tim, because my heart was beating so fast, and I was thinking, oh my god, this guy is just over the top.
Yeah, he is a bit of an overprotective, paranoid dad kind of figure. Yeah.
And was he inspired by anybody? How did you create Ed?
Well, he to be honest, him and me have got quite a lot in common. So we're a very similar age. I've got a daughter who's 20, so she's a bit younger than Abbie in the book. But yeah, he's sort of me kind of dialed up to all the way up to 10 kind of thing in terms of how he reacts to things and how he perceives things. And there are things in his past, in his kind of backstory that I don't have, but that have kind of made him react to things in the way that he does. And I don't want to give away too much for people who've not read the story, but there are things he's experienced in his life that kind of make him tend towards that kind of massively overprotective kind of figure in her life, which is obviously massively frustrating for his daughter, because she's, like I say, she's 24, she's smart, and she's got a good job, and she wants to go out and live her own life and make her own decisions, and Ed is really struggling to kind of let her do that. And so there's a bit of inspiration from me, but I hope my daughter's read the book and she's still talking to me, but she recognises kind of a few things, that we have in common. So yeah, he's just like he's like probably some parents out there that dialed all the way up to 10. So.
And is Abbie like your daughter and Claire like your wife?
Yeah,
Claire's the mum, by the way.
There are some parallels there. So Abbie physically was kind of based very much on my daughter, who's Sophie, in terms of the way they look and things like that. And Claire is a bit. It's got a lot of character traits that my own wife has. So I do have drawn on, my own family, and I've done that before in other books as well. So. My son said the other day, "When are you going to write a book which doesn't have any of us in it?" And I said, maybe next time. Maybe the next one will be we'll be a book off. So.
And where did Ryan come from? So Ryan is the character who's the very on the surface lovely boyfriend, the proper catch. But where did he come from?
He has just really come out of my head. So people have asked me, is he based on a particular, on one of your daughter's boyfriends? Which the answer is no. He's very much kind of a someone that I just created as a, like I say, outwardly he appears to be very, very kind of he's got everything going for him, really. So he was just based on, I suppose. There's a character. He's a kind of he's a mixture, a kind of a composite of various different people that I've known or have thought about. So he's not based on one individual. I'd like to point out.
Okay, that's good. That's good. So when you're writing about characters like Ryan, I mean, he's a pretty unpleasant, manipulative person. Does that make you feel uncomfortable? Where do you get all that background information from?
Not really. I mean, I've actually found him quite easy to write, in the sense that sometimes with characters it just really flows really easily, and it seemed to flow with him quite easily. So again, without kind of giving too much away, he is a person who is, he always knows the right thing to say, the right thing to do, the right kind of angle to take with things. And he's a very clever guy. And sometimes you find with people like that they'll show one side to one group of people and quite a different side to other people. And I think that's, as a sort of a writer, that's always a fascinating character to write. And of course, with my kind of thriller writer's head on, I'm always thinking of, what's the worst that could happen? What's the worst situation that could develop from any given starting point? So I have to stop myself kind of catastrophizing too much in everyday life, because it's not a good thing to be doing every day. But as a writer, it's quite a good tool to think, what's the worst thing that could happen here? And it's not that you think your son-in-law is going to be some horrible degenerate person that everybody thinks is terrible. It's actually someone who you think you're kind of, everybody else thinks is brilliant, and you're the only one who thinks he's a danger. Of course, that's kind of much worse in many ways than having someone that everybody recognises is a bad person. So. And
did you have to do much research into that gut feeling thing? Because Ed was the only one who had that gut feeling. Do you think it's possible to actually have that feeling? How did you research it?
I think again, that's just kind of, I did some research into sort of psychology and people's reactions to things. My daughter's actually, she's doing a degree in psychology, and so I've had conversations with her about things like that. But I think with the gut feel, I think it will depend on how kind of tuned into that kind of thing you are. And I'm actually not that good at that kind of thing, but if you're someone who's really attuned to people and to strangers, and picking things up, picking signals up, I think it's something that certain people are really good at. And I'm quite interested in the whole idea of how do you judge a complete stranger, someone you've never met before, how do you make a decision about them, to sort of how you're going to behave with them and how you're going to go forward with them. I think that's really interesting, because obviously that's been really important to people forever, because we've always had to make decisions about people we don't know, and the way people make those decisions I think is really, as a writer, it's a really kind of interesting area, because you can get it terribly wrong, but you can also have that sixth sense about someone you can't really explain in a rational way, but it's still there.
Yeah, quite fascinating. And how did you start with writing the book? Did you start with the characters, or did you start with the plot?
Yeah, I mean, I started with kind of both at the same time, I suppose, because I knew there would be the mum and the dad, and obviously the daughter and the partner. So I started with those four, and the plot that kind of, that kind of initial setup that I described to you just now, and then I kind of worked. I'll tend to plan for about 6 weeks or something like that, 6 to 8 weeks before I start writing. Try and plan out as much of the story as I think makes sense, and then some of the sort of key points along the way. But yeah, it was those four characters were kind of the core of the story, and then certain other characters came into it as I went along. And yeah, and there's always things that when you're writing, when you're doing the draft, there's always things that kind of surprise you and which you hadn't thought about, and I haven't planned for, but you then kind of incorporate into the draft because they work well in the story. So to be honest, most of the time I generally tend to have the plot is there a bit before the characters, but this time they were very much kind of all tied in together. So that was they're the sort of the four main people in the story, and they drive everything forward.
And do you know the twists before, like for example in The Holiday as well, it was similar. Do you know the twist before you start, so you set out on the writing, or do they come along as you go?
It's a bit of a mixture really. I tend to know so in The Holiday I knew kind of probably 4 or 5 of the key points, and anybody who's read it, and you probably know what I'm talking about in terms of some of the key kind of turning points in the story. I knew what they would be. I didn't quite know where they would be or in what sequence they would happen, but I have some of them, but there's always also things that I can't really plan for, because you have to see, once you start writing the characters and writing them into the story, and it becomes obvious that something would then happen, or it becomes clear that something you plan to happen doesn't make any sense. So you have to kind of adapt along the way. But I would tend to have some of the key twists, and certainly roughly speaking, the kind of where it's going to end up, have that in my head when I start writing the first draft.
Interesting. And you write in the catch, you're writing at the beginning in the voice of Ed, and then later you switch to the voice of some of the other characters. Is it more difficult for you to write in the female voice than the male voice?
I suppose it takes it, maybe not more difficult, but I think I probably spend a bit more time on it because it's a bit less instinctive to me. But I've a lot of help with that in terms of, so the first people who read any draft will be my wife, my agent, and my editor. So they're 3 sort of female perspectives on the writing, and they all really help to sort of hone the female characters in there. But so I suppose they're a bit more of a challenge. But I do, and obviously with The Holiday, there were all 4 of the main characters in it were all female. So that did take some work. But in some ways, I think maybe it's better to kind of have, when you're writing from someone else's perspective, it's better to almost step away more, to be looking at it from a outside perspective, rather than to be writing almost as if it's you doing it. I think sometimes it can create better writing if you're kind of at one remove from that person you're writing about, because you're thinking more about, how do I get inside their head, rather than thinking I'm already inside their head. So.
And you do it really well. It was really, I mean, for me reading it as a female, it was really interesting to switch into those female heads. And because I was reading it knowing that I was going to speak to you as well, I was obviously probably more critical than I would have been if I was just reading it. But you did it really, really well. Didn't seem to be too much of a skip between the two. So, and how did you name your characters? Where did you get the names from?
I went through in the catch. Ed was originally had a different name, and he was originally called Mark. But I've got a couple of good friends called Mark, and so that became. If I have someone that I know kind of well, I don't generally. It makes it more difficult for me to use their name. So then I wanted something that I ended up with Ed, but I went through a lot of different possibilities, and sometimes you'll just kind of go through them. I'll talk to my wife about them and my kids, and we'll bat names back and forth, and then you'll kind of arrive at something which just feels like it's right for the character and for the story. It's quite hard to explain. It has to kind of fit with the age the person is, and sometimes I'll look back at, so with Abbie, she's 24, so she's born in what does that take? It's the mid 80s, I think. Hang on, no.
It must be 90 something, mustn't it?
Oh, sorry, mid 90s. So mid 90s. So sometimes I will look, if I've got a character like that. Sometimes I'll look back on the internet. You can find most popular boys and girls names from any given year, and I'll sometimes there'll be a top 100, and I'll kind of look down there and make a short list, and then quite often I'll choose a name and put it into the draft and be writing using that character's name, and then but all the time knowing that it's probably not quite right. And then when I find one I feel happy with, then it seems to slot into place, and I stop thinking about changing it. So it's it's quite a weird process, I suppose. But with the holiday again, that's made it a bit more difficult, because you want to make sure that all the 4 women's names are quite distinguishable from each other on the page. So you don't want a character called Laura and a character called Laurie. You don't want one called Claire and one called Cleo. You want to have so there's a bit of deliberate choice there in terms of picking names that are not going to be confusing, and are going to make it a bit easier for the reader to keep track of who's who in a book, because it had quite a few characters in there. So, but yeah, with the catch, then the names, I think Ryan was a very early that was probably the only one that didn't change right from the start, because I just liked, it's about, it feels right for his age, his early 30s. And in my head, it just sort of seemed right for him. So there's not really a kind of scientific answer for that. It's just I go through lots of different options, and until I arrive at ones that I think work for the characters.
And do you find any of the scenes particularly difficult to write? I mean, I don't want to give too much away, and I don't want you to give too much away, but are there bits that you find more difficult to write?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose some of there are scenes that are more difficult. I suppose for me, the easier ones tend to be towards the end, when I know exactly what's going to happen, and I've kind of built it up to a certain point, and then I can just really crack on with bringing the story to a conclusion. So I suppose some of the more difficult ones are in this middle section of the story. So the end and the beginning, they tend to be, there's quite a good sense of how you're going to kick things off and where you're going to end up. The some of the middle chapters can be more difficult, because you're constantly asking yourself, well, okay, is the story getting bogged down? Are the characters going around in circles? Do we need this? So you can, but all the time you're kind of conscious that you want to be pushing forward with the writing. So they can be the kind of middle. People call it the soggy middle sometimes. When you're drafting a book, because you get to that middle section and everything slows down, and so yeah, they can be difficult. And for me, the hardest point in a draft is always around about the 50,000 word mark, which is about halfway through, and you just you've already come quite a long way, so you can't throw it in the bin, but you've got a long way to go to the end before you can, before you've got to that sort of 90, 100,000 word mark. So yeah, some of the middle chapters can be, sometimes you feel like you're going around in circles, and quite often in the second and third drafts, they'll be the ones that get, if not cut, then they'll be maybe merged or, edited down. So, but that's part of the process. So.
And the more violent scenes, are they okay to write? Is that a bit that I don't want to say enjoy writing, but it comes quite easily?
Yeah, I mean, I try not to be gratuitous, and my editor's got a really good sense for this, a really good eye for it in terms of um, what's right for the genre and what people are, because people react which is what you'd want them to do. People react quite strongly to violence in books, so I think it's important not to put it in there for the sake of it, but also, you're writing thrillers, you're probably going to have, well, not probably, but there's quite likely there's going to be some kind of confrontation in the story. So I don't find it too difficult, but the only difficult thing is about kind of striking the right balance between, you don't want to gloss over it, but you don't want to go into too much gory detail, because I think that can really put people off sometimes if they're suddenly struck by something especially against animals. That's kind of a big no.
Yeah. And the scenes when the police get involved, do you have police friends or people that you can take advice from?
Yeah, I've got. I'm lucky enough that there's a guy in the Nottinghamshire force who's always been very helpful when I've sent him questions, and I sometimes ring him up and ask him questions. I also know another guy who I've just started for the last book, who's a solicitor, so he works particularly around people the first time they're arrested and the question, that kind of thing. So I'm also a friend of a friend who's a doctor, so it's kind of, I can kind of sometimes draw on them. But yeah, with the police, it's particularly important because obviously there's lots and lots of police books out there, books with lots of police in them, and you feel more pressure to kind of get it right, or at least not get it too off the mark. So it's really useful to be able to say to this the police contact that I have, to throw questions, and he's never fazed by anything, however sort of strange and weird the questions are. He's always kind of very, he's probably, I guess he's probably heard it all before or seen it all before, because he's been around in the force quite a long time. So yeah, he's really helpful.
Brilliant. And the book's set in Nottingham, and then you take a little detour into the Peak District. Don't want to say too much, but that's presumably an area that you know really well. Did you kind of walk up those paths when you were telling the story?
I did. So people have been asking me for the last couple of books, why have you not set a book in Nottingham where you live? And I didn't really have a very good answer. I mean, obviously the holiday is set in France, it's on holiday, but previous to that have been both in London. And so people have said, well, why don't you set it in Nottingham? So I thought, well, that's a good question. So the parts of the story that they're in the Nottingham area, I do know quite well, and I live sort of around, particularly where the wedding takes place. That's like a half a mile from my house. So with the Derbyshire parts of the story, my father-in-law actually said, we were having a conversation one night about locations and for certain types of story and certain things that would happen, and he said, well, do you know anything about the Dark Peak in Derbyshire? And I actually didn't. I've been to Derbyshire lots of times, into the Peak District, but I've never been to that part of it. So we went up there, we took a day and went to that little village, went up onto the moors, and really took a good look around. So that was really helpful, because you can't really substitute for the kind of getting your feet on the ground and going out there and looking at everything. And I went out there and made some notes, took lots of pictures, and that was really helpful too, because it's absolutely beautiful up there, and it's also quite remote. And you do occasionally hear stories about people getting lost and going missing and what have you up there. So, but it was good to have that kind of first-hand experience of all the sort of sights and sounds and smells of the Dark Peak, because it was, like you say, it kind of forms quite a key part of the story.
Yeah, and I could definitely feel that. I was there when you were, you described it so well. I was actually there walking up those paths, and it was really well written, that bit, in terms of being actually placing yourself there. That's lovely. So Tim, tell us a little bit how you got into writing, because you were a journalist previously, is that right?
Yeah, I was a journalist in Nottingham here at when it was called the Evening Post at the time, and then I left there in 2001. Went and did 3 years working in London for the Daily Mail. I was a science reporter, and 2004 I came back to Nottingham and went to work at the university here as a press officer, and then kind of spent a long time there, actually, 12, 13 years there in that kind of in different roles. And by the time I left, I was the deputy director in charge of the communications team. So I had been writing probably for about, before my first book came out in the beginning of 2017, I've been writing for about 10 or 11 years before that, trying to get an agent, trying to get a publisher, and had a previous book that I'd written and rewritten several times and went out to publishers and didn't get picked up. So then I wrote Lies following that, which was offered. So I was offered a publishing deal in 2016, and which was kind of, it was kind of the culmination of, like I say, sort of 9-10 years work at that point. So then the first book came out January 2017, and 2 weeks after that, by a kind of coincidence, my boss at the university came into my office and handed me a letter and said, "You need to read this." And it was a notice that my job was being made redundant in a restructure. So I had at that point the chance to either apply for a new role within the new structure or to take redundancy. And I kind of wrestled with it for 2 or 3 weeks, and then finally decided that maybe, with the book out there, and maybe now was the time to, I had a 2-book contract, so I had another book to come to be delivered. And so I sort of took the plunge at that point, and then June that year, June 2017, I finished at the university, and I've been doing that ever since. So it's kind of just about 3 years now that I've been writing full time. So I was doing some freelance writing as well, some copywriting on the side, which is now it's kind of finished. But so it was kind of a strange, that year 2017 was quite a strange time for me, because I was going from being having a proper job, as my kids called it, having a full-time job and writing in the evenings, to going to being fully reliant on the writing side. And it was and since then I've obviously had another contract with Bonnier, my publisher, and I've now got another one for the 5th and 6th books, which will come out next year and the year after. So far it's kind of seems to be going okay, and I'm enjoying it. And I've kind of had this little cabin here now at the bottom of my garden where I write, and I was writing in a spare room for many years, but that just kind of got so cluttered and crazy with books that it made sense to try and have a dedicated writing space. So this is where I work now most of the time. So
do you work all day, Tim? Do you just go out of your house and go to work to your bottom of your garden?
Yeah, if I'm drafting, well, to be honest, in the last couple of weeks I've been decorating, because I'm in between drafts, but I've been painting the whole stairs and landing. But if I'm writing your first draft or editing, I'll generally just come down here about 8 o'clock or 7:30 in the morning, and work until lunchtime, and then probably do another 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon, and then do other things around that. But pretty much I'm down here most of the time. So which is good, because for me the lockdown has been it's affected other things in massive ways, but in terms of my working routine, it's actually, for me, I've been really lucky, and I've been able to still just come down here and crack on with what I need to do. So
what made you want to write in the first place?
It was always something I had in my mind to do, and I obviously enjoyed English at school, and that was kind of part of the reason why I was drawn into journalism in the first place. And I thought, well, but I think I'd always had, even from when I was maybe, in my 20s, which was quite a long time ago, thinking it would happen, thinking I would do it. But then I got to my mid-30s and I thought, well, it's only going to happen if you make it. If you got to literally sit down and write every day and try and be disciplined about it. And so from about my mid-30s, when I came back from working in London, that was the point at which I thought, okay, well, now if you want to see if you can do this, you need to try and write every day and put together a full-length manuscript. So that was what I did. But I always kind of had it notion in my head that I would like to try and do it. But it was only, it took quite a few years for me to realise that I would have to do it myself, put the work in to try and to find out if I could. So yeah, I always like writing. So I love what I do. So.
Brilliant. How lovely to do a job that you love. Are you able to tell us a bit about your new book?
So the new book, which for next year, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the new book is called Trust Me, and that will be coming out in summer 2021. The exact date to be confirmed. And that I've just written the first draft of that, and I'll be doing some editing on it through this summer, I expect. So that is basically a story about the starting point. The first chapter is a woman on a train. Her name's Ellen, and she is alone on this train and heading back to her house from an appointment she's had, and someone sits down opposite her. A young mum sits down opposite her with a baby in her arms, and the young mum is kind of quite flustered and quite tearful, and her phone's ringing the whole time. And so Ellen says to her, "Look, do you want me to help you out? I could hold the baby while you make your phone call, or do whatever you need to do. I can, let me help you." So she takes the baby and is kind of looking at it, and the mum goes off to sort this phone call out and doesn't come back. And then the train pulls into a station, and the next thing Ellen sees is the young mum kind of hurrying away down the platform without looking back. So she's left there with this baby in her arms. She doesn't know who the mother is, what her name is, why she's left it with her. And then so that's the kind of starting point for the story. She has to obviously the young mum has decided to put her trust, for whatever reason, in Ellen to look after this tiny baby. So, and that's the kind of the first two chapters probably, and it goes on from there as to what is happening. And Ellen tries to, obviously she also wants to do the right thing for the baby and for the mum, and also try to find out what is going on. And it's all kind of develops from there. So,
perhaps it's that gut feeling thing again.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Intriguing. So Tim, thank you so much. Just before you go, tell us some of the highlights from maybe the last year where you feel like your books are being successful.
I suppose one of the highlights would be, so this time, in July, August last year, when making the Sunday Times bestseller list for the first time, the sort of top 10 with the holiday, that was pretty amazing. I suppose with the catch, it's been a strange launch this year. It came out on June the 11th, and I did a Facebook Live launch for that, which was really kind of it was actually a lot of fun to do. And if anybody wants to watch that in its entirety, it's on my Facebook page. So that was kind of a real it was a kind of a milestone for me, I suppose, because I've never really done that before. So that was really good. And I suppose, again, at some point towards the end of last year, I hit this figure of 750,000 copies sold in the UK. So my first 3 books. So that was, that's kind of another high point. And it's one of those things, if you'd said to me 3 years ago that could happen, you'd have just kind of, I would never have believed it. So it's, that's been a real kind of highlight for me. So there's lots.
Tim, I have to say, I almost surprised myself about how much I enjoyed reading psychological thrillers, and I've sold several copies of The Catch and The Holiday from the Bookshop since I read your book. So that's good. Personal recommendation is always marvellous. And for me to read something a little bit different to what I normally read, it was it was such a pleasure. And as I say, I read them both really, really quickly, and now I've got my eye on the other 2. So that's going to be my next week cut out. But it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and I hope you'll come back and talk to us again when your new book comes out. That would be great. And maybe we'll have our November festival in 2021, and maybe you could come and see us in Tring. It'd be really good to see you.
I'd love to, yeah.
All right, brilliant. Thank you, Tim, so much.
Thanks for inviting me.
Massive thanks to TM Logan and to Kim Baiden for that wonderful interview. So the catch is available in our bookshop. Give us a call on 01442 827 653. All the other purchase blurb is available in the text below this video. Loads more author interviews to come, so do keep an eye on this, and do subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Thank you very much.